The Seattle Seahawks are Super Bowl champions. How does their lineup compare to the Bills? We're going to explore that today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Well, folks, welcome in. I want to have a quick conversation with you today comparing the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks lineup to the Bills lineup and, determine where each side has an advantage. So I want to compare the quarterbacks, the running backs, tight ends, receivers, O-line, of course, the defensive positions as well. And just really kind of stack things up and maybe have some conversations along the way about how what Seattle has or doesn't have can help inform some of the decisions the Bills should make this offseason. So let's do it. Let's start with a quarterback position. And so you have Josh Allen versus Sam Darnold. And I respect what's been going on with Sam Darnold. I love how he's completely changed his career, really starting last year with Minnesota. The opportunity in Seattle, I think he had a great season. Josh Allen's a better quarterback than Sam Darnold. Bills, advantage Bills when it comes to quarterback. At running back, I think it's a tighter conversation. The Bills, of course, have the NFL's rushing king in James Cook. And then Seattle has Ken Walker, Super Bowl MVP Ken Walker. Both are really good players. And of course, Ken Walker was terrific in the Super Bowl, and so that weighs heavily. I would rather have James Cook. I think James Cook is a more diverse runner in terms of concepts that he can run. And I think he's just a lot more consistent. Ken Walker's a really dynamic player, a good NFL starting running back. He's also a guy that doesn't consistently see three, get three. He's a great player. Don't get me wrong, but I'll take the consistency that I get with James Cook more than the Ken Walker variable, which is sometimes feast or famine. Of course, he had a great game against the Patriots, but I'm still picking James Cook over Ken Walker. So 2 for 2 on the Bills. That'll change, trust me. Let's get to tight end. The Bills group of tight ends, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Jackson Hawes, against Seattle, who features A.J. Barner, who really came on this year. It's kind of a build as a blocking tight end that showed up as a receiver this year. Elijah Arroyo, a rookie this year out of Miami. I think he's going to give them a vertical threat. Didn't quite, come together fully this year, which you'd expect, but I think he's got a bright future. And then Eric Saubert, who's been a depth tight end for a number of years across the NFL. I'm taking the Bills here as well. I think Kincaid is the most dynamic overall receiving piece. I think Knox and Barner are kind of comparable. You have an experience component with Knox, and then I'll take Hawes as the blocking specialist over Eric Saubert. So Bills take tight end as well, which gets us to receiver, and this is where Seattle's going to take one. Obviously not hard to top what the Bills have at receiver, and so I was putting this together and trying to think, all right, well, who really are the guys? I know Khalil Shakir, and then what I say, it's Keon Coleman and Brandon Cooks and Josh Palmer, or how does this really work together? Tyrell Shavers. Point being is that whatever combination of Bills receivers you want to go with, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Cooper Kupp, and Rashid Shaheed is a better trio. And Jackson Smith-Njigba, obviously the offensive player of the year in the NFL, he was unbelievable. I mean, this guy had 1,200 more yards than the number 2 receiver on the Seattle Seahawks. 1,200 more yards. He was unreal. You know a player's special when everybody knows the ball's going to him and the defense doesn't have an answer. And then I think Cooper Kupp complements Jackson Smith-Njigba. Cooper Kupp's days as a volume receiver in the league are behind him. But as a next option with a pretty good tight end room and, one of the top 3 to 5 receivers in the league, yeah, he'll work. And then, of course, they traded for Rashid Shaheed, who gives them verticality, return ability, some gadgety stuff. He'll be a free agent. So maybe that's a player the Bills can explore in free agency. But advantage Seattle when it comes to the wide receiver group. That gets us to the offensive line. And I think this is an interesting conversation. I am going to take the Bills offensive line, but there's a storyline that I want to kind of highlight here. Let's talk about the tackles first. The Bills have Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown. I think that's a exceptional pair of NFL starting tackles. And Seattle has a good group too. Their left tackle, Charles Cross, outstanding young player that just signed a big extension. And then Abraham Lucas at right tackle is a good starting right tackle. I think it's somewhat of a comparable pair of tackles with the Bills compared to Seattle. I'd give the edge to the Bills, but it's certainly very close. The Bills are infinitely better on the interior with David Edwards at left guard, Connor McGovern at center, and Osiris Torrance at right guard. And so I am giving the advantage to the Bills, but let me talk a little bit about Seattle's interior offensive line because the Bills are facing a huge moment with their interior offensive line with Edwards and McGovern being expiring contracts and then Osiris Torrance on the last year of his rookie deal. And you have questions about this group and what the right thing is to do this offseason. Let me tell you about Seattle's interior offensive line, which is massively upgradable. Their left guard is Gray Zabel, who was their first-round pick, and he got better throughout the course of the season. Still a rookie, but I thought he had a good rookie season. Their center, Jalen Sundell, was an undrafted free agent in 2024 that played like 50 snaps as a rookie. He winds up being their starting center this year in year 2 as a UDFA second-year player out of North Dakota State. And then their right guard, Anthony Bradford, I don't think he's really a starting caliber player. In fact, I was at the gym today, and my friend who's a Seahawks fan, he was in the sauna. We were talking about it, and we were talking about the offensive line, and he says, I think Anthony Bradford's the worst starting guard in the NFL. Ask a Seahawks fan what they think of Anthony Bradford. Point being is, of course, you look at Gray Zabel as a really nice young piece, and we'll see what happens with Jalen Sundell. But a question mark, right, is a second-year player that didn't really play as a rookie out of a small school, and then a player that at right guard that's not really viewed as ideally a starter. And so as the Bills are probably transitioning away from Edwards and McGovern, and you might have some uncertainty with who they put in there, realize that Seattle just won the Super Bowl with a highly questionable interior offensive line and a lesser quarterback in Sam Darnold behind it. So I'm giving the advantage to the Bills, and really the interior offensive line tips the scales massively towards Buffalo. So the Bills take a lot of the offensive positions. Defense is going to be a lot different of a conversation. We'll explore that here next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a local, trusted expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online. They're going to handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. It's a huge time saver and gives you real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it all. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. The Winter Games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking in for events you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years. That's why following the Winter Games on FanDuel just makes sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports you care about most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. Maybe it's the drama of curling matches that start slow and get intense fast, speed skating races that are decided by inches, hockey games that feel different right from the opening face-off. So much going on. You're going to be locked into the competition, and FanDuel is going to keep the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. So the Winter Games are on, and there's no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. All right, welcome back, folks. We got another little segment here. I want to talk about the defense and get used to these, second episodes. It's going to be happening a lot moving forward, and I'm excited to fill this feed with even more content and different types of conversations. So get used to it. We're going to be doing a lot here. All right, let's talk about these defenses, comparing the Bills, of course, the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. On the edge, the Bills' top three would be Greg Rousseau, Joey Bosa, AJ Epinesa. And Seattle has DeMarcus Lawrence, Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall. Let me say one thing about DeMarcus Lawrence. If you want to get excited about Greg Rousseau in the Jim Leonard defense, look at what DeMarcus Lawrence was able to do this year in Seattle. I think they'll play similar roles, and Lawrence was terrific. And Uchenna Nwosu's been a really good player that's battled injuries the last few years, and then Boye Mafe and Derek Hall are both athletic freaks that also factor in, and that's a lot better than what the Bills have. I think Rousseau's probably number 2 overall in this group. And then I think you have Nwosu, Mafe, then Bosa, then Hall, then a lot further down would be Epinesa. I think Seattle's just got a lot more. They're better on the edge. On the interior, the Bills have Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Deion Walker, and then I guess Larry Ogunjobi, TJ Sanders has nothing on what Seattle has in Leonard Williams, who's a veteran that's playing and continues to play at an exceptionally high level. Byron Murphy, a first-round draft pick a couple years ago out of Texas, who really put it all together this year. He looks like an absolute stud. And then Jerron Reed, who has had a heck of a career. That's a nose tackle that can move, right? So when you start to think about, what the Bills need on the nose, look at what Seattle has and Byron Murphy and Jerron Reed, who are both big dudes that can really move. You'd love to have that pair playing in the A-gaps for you. So, yeah, Seattle by a ton here at defensive line. And so I think that's kind of the interesting thought that I would have about Seattle this year and even last year, Philadelphia, two teams that their pass rush really showed up in big ways throughout the course of the season, but of course, in the Super Bowl really was dominant. And I would say that neither Philly last year or Seattle this year had an A-list player like a Myles Garrett or a Max Crosby. But I would say that they are 6 or 7 guys deep of quality, right? Like Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, Jerron Reed, DeMarcus Lawrence, Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall. Like the sum of that is really, really strong. And so as I, of course, think about the idea of the Bills trading for Max Crosby or some type of big time pass rusher, I would not be opposed to it, right? Like I would love that. Don't get me wrong. But I do wonder if it's more about having a lot of quality as opposed to one elite player and then, 1 or 2 other guys. I think you got to have a lot of depth. And I think Philly last year and Seattle this year really speak to that. So major advantage for Seattle, both on the edge and at defensive tackle. At linebacker, I guess the Bills would be Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano. That would be their preferred starters versus Ernest Jones and Drake Thomas. It's an interesting conversation here. I don't know that you would, like in a vacuum, say Ernest Jones and Drake Thomas are better players than Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano, but how they fit into this overall picture, they get a lot more impact out of their backers than the Bills have been able to get out of their backers. And so, like in a vacuum, it's probably the Bills in terms of like talented players, but in terms of how they fit and perform for their defense, it's Seattle. And so I give the edge to Seattle because I think that's what matters the most. It's not like individually how good of a player you are. It's how do you fit into that team with what's around you? And I think Seattle got superior impact out of Ernest Jones and Drake Thomas and even Tyrese Knight than what the Bills have been getting out of their linebackers. So I give the edge to Seattle here. At corner, the Bills have Christian Benford, Trey White, Taron Johnson in the slot. I guess you could factor in like a platoon of Hairston and White. I'm very excited about Hairston and Benford. I think it's a really exciting pair moving forward. Seattle has Josh Jobe, who wasn't really like a great player with the Eagles. Came to Seattle and with Mike McDonald playing at an elite level. As at a high level. Reek Woolen, who obviously had a great season, and then Devin Witherspoon, who's probably the best slot corner in the entire NFL. So I think this is fairly close, but Devin Witherspoon in the slot versus Taron Johnson is massively advantage Seattle. I think maybe there's somewhat of a push when it comes to Benford versus Woolen. And then Joby's better than White right now. Joby's better than Harrison right now. So advantage Seattle when it comes to corners. At safety, the Bills have Cole Bishop, Jordan Poyer versus Julian Love and Kobe Bryant. So much more versatility with the group that Seattle has. They also play Ty Okada, who's a small school guy that really fits in. They also have Nick Eamon-Warry, of course. They have more versatility, better players. Nick Eamon-Warry looks like an absolute star already as a rookie. So they're deeper and better at safety. And then kicking and punting, whoever you want to say it is for the Bills, Tyler Bass and Mitch Wishnowsky, that is not as good as Michael Dixon and Jason Myers, who are absolute stud specialists. Michael Dixon, one of the best punters in the game, and you saw how good he was in the Super Bowl. How many times did he pin them back deep? As 3 inside the 20, but I think they were all like around like the 5 or 6. Several times where he was rushed, and he's got that really efficient stroke to get the ball out. He's terrific. So advantage Seattle when it comes to special teams. So, and returner Rashid Shaheed's better than anything the Bills have. So yes, advantage Seattle special teams. So I gave the Bills the edge at quarterback, running back, tight end, and offensive line. That's 4 spots. I give Seattle the edge at wide receiver, edge rusher, defensive line, linebacker, corner, safety, and special teams. So 7 for Seattle, 4 for the Bills. And really, it gets lopsided on defense. I don't have the Bills with an edge at any of the defensive positions. And so I think a lot about, like, what does that game look like if the Bills are playing Seattle? Of course, Josh Allen is a huge X factor, and Josh Allen could go nuclear and beat anybody. I think it would have been a much more competitive game, of course, than what New England gave Seattle. But, I would be nervous about how the Bills offense would have fared against Seattle. And I would have had some concerns about, the Bills defense and if they could have done enough in that game to shut down a Ken Walker, to contain a Jackson Smith-Njigba, in a game that would probably be a little bit lower scoring. So I'm not going to say that I would have predicted the Bills to lose. They'd have been more competitive, but, we saw the Bills kind of have some variance on offense, and were they going to get kind of like the overall production? I know that there was like super big black eyes against Denver, but that's a top defense that they moved the ball fine and scored. Or would they get against the Eagles, right, where the Bills were mistake prone and couldn't finish, or like against Houston, same kind of thing, right? I don't know exactly. I would say that Seattle's probably the best defense of all of them, and so that would, if you're being honest, probably lean you into the Bills kind of having some struggles. But of course, it's Josh Allen. So it's also the Bills defense, which, sometimes in the playoffs could look pretty shaky. All right, there you have it. Bills versus the Super Bowl champions, how they stack up. I give the Bills the edge on 4 positions, Seattle the edge on 7. Let me know what you think. If you're in the YouTube, leave a comment. Tell me where you agree, disagree. And tell me yourself, put the positions there and tell me who you think has the edge. Have some fun here as we consider this Bills roster against the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today. Have an episode coming to you in the morning. We're going to talk about the Bills linebackers, Terrell Bernard, the expiring contracts. What's Dorian Williams going to look like in this defense? So that's coming your way in the morning. Don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.